What's a secret you have sworn never to tell, but you'll gladly share anonymously on the internet? We've made a bittersweet pact to enjoy our final months together, but the looming shadow of our inevitable separation has cast a pall over even our brightest moments. I'm still waiting for the promised good times to materialize, but they seem as elusive as morning mist, dissipating under the harsh sun of reality. When she finally leaves, I'll find myself untethered, drifting without the anchors that typically keep people grounded in place. My family is far away, their presence more theoretical than practical. Those ride-or-die friendships that once defined my life, the kind where you could call at 3 a.m. during a crisis, have gradually faded into occasional social media interactions and hollow promises to catch up soon. The suffocating monotony of my current environment has become increasingly unbearable. So, I'm methodically preparing my exodus, canceling my lease, researching train routes, and plotting my disappearance with the attention to detail of someone planning a heist. This won't be my first vanishing act. I've performed this disappearing trick before, and I'm certain I can execute it again. The duration of my absence remains undefined. It could be months, or it might stretch into years. I've even taken the precaution of applying for a passport, just in case my wanderlust carries me beyond national borders. There's something oddly liberating about preparing to become a ghost, about planning to slip between the cracks of society and emerge somewhere new, somewhere unknown. Perhaps this time, I'll find what I've been searching for, or perhaps I'll simply keep running until I run out of places to run to. The only certainty is the growing certainty that staying here, surrounded by the familiar shadows of what once was, is no longer an option. Story 17. This is a secret shared only between my great-uncle and me, a dark truth he made me swear to keep hidden, knowing its revelation could have led to his imprisonment. The events unfolded during my early childhood, when I was 5 or 6 years old and plagued by persistent insomnia. My great-uncle had developed a routine of taking me on late-night walks through our English neighborhood, hoping the physical activity would tire me enough for sleep. These nighttime excursions became our special ritual, a time when the world seemed to belong only to us. But one winter night, our peaceful routine would be shattered by violence and necessity. The air was bitter cold, the streets treacherously icy, typical of an English winter night at around 3 a.m. We lived in what could generously be called a rough neighborhood, where poverty and desperation often bred violence. As we made our way home, a man emerged from the shadows, brandishing a knife that gleamed dully in the weak streetlight. He threatened to stab me unless my great-uncle handed over his money. We were poor ourselves, barely scraping by, with hardly any cash to surrender. My great-uncle, an imposing figure standing 6 feet 2 inches, refused the demand. What happened next occurred with the swift brutality of a lightning strike. He lunged forward, his forehead connecting with the assailant's face in a devastating headbutt. The impact sent the would-be robber reeling backward, his feet betrayed by the treacherous ice. His skull connected with the frozen curb with a sickening crack, and in that instant, a life was extinguished. My great-uncle grabbed my small hand and hurried me home, his grip firm but gentle, his pace urgent but measured to accommodate my shorter legs. Once we were safely inside, he knelt before me, his eyes level with mine, and explained why we could never speak of what had happened. A man had died, yes, but he had died trying to harm a child. My great-uncle's actions had saved my life, but the law might not see it that way. The secret would have to remain buried, like the man who had threatened us. My great-uncle passed away last year, taking most of this story with him to his grave. But I'll never forget what he did that night, or the countless other things he did throughout my life to protect and care for me. Sometimes the truest heroes are the ones whose stories remain untold, their bravest acts known only to those they save. Story 18. My 8-year relationship with my ex-girlfriend was approaching its final chapter, though neither of us knew it at the time. We had built a life together, sharing not just a home, but all the intricate threads that weave 2 lives into one. Like many couples, we faced our share of problems, but nothing seemed insurmountable, until I made a decision that would unravel everything. My company had hired a new employee, and what began as harmless workplace interactions spiraled into an affair. Then came the news that would force my hand. She was pregnant. Suddenly, I found myself trapped in a web of my own making, forced to end my relationship with my girlfriend under the pretense that our problems were irreconcilable. The truth was, I still loved her and wanted desperately to maintain our life together. But the weight of my actions had made that impossible. I met with the new girl, and we decided on what seemed like the only solution: termination of the pregnancy. However, in our country, such procedures are illegal, forcing us into the shadows of a questionable medical facility, if you could even call it that. The procedure was botched, leading to severe complications that continue to plague her health 9 months later. We've spent countless hours in private clinics, consulting with doctors, draining our finances in an attempt to address the ongoing medical issues. My sense of responsibility, however diminished it might be, has kept me by her side throughout this ordeal. After 9 months of shared trauma, she's developed genuine feelings for me, professing her love. But I feel nothing in return. My heart remains with my ex-girlfriend. If I were to leave now, she wouldn't be able to afford the private medical care she desperately needs. So I stay, trapped by guilt and obligation, while the woman I truly love, my ex-girlfriend, wants to reconcile. She remains unaware of the real reason for our separation, and the knowledge that two women are suffering because of my actions makes me feel like the worst kind of person. I'm caught in a prison of my own design, where every choice seems wrong and every path leads to someone's pain. The weight of being the architect of so much suffering is almost unbearable. Sometimes I wonder if there's any way to make things right, or if some mistakes are simply too profound to ever truly fix. Story 19. I came dangerously close to crossing an unforgivable line with my best friend's mother. She's one of those rare women who has maintained her allure well into her mature years, the kind of beauty that grows more refined with age. My best friend is female, I'm male, and we've maintained a purely platonic relationship for nearly a decade now. We've collaborated on musical projects, written songs together, and shared the kind of friendship that makes others question if there's something more. But there never has been. Our connection has naturally extended to her family, particularly her mother and younger sister, who's now about 15. My friend and I are in our mid-20s, and I've become something of an honorary family member over the years. The mother has been experiencing turbulent times with her boyfriend, and fate conspired to place us in an unexpected situation. We had already made plans to enjoy dinner at an upscale restaurant in town, where one of her musician friends was performing with a Latin jazz ensemble. The timing coincidentally aligned with her relationship troubles, but the evening proceeded normally at first. She rarely drinks, you might say never, but that night she indulged in sangria. I had enjoyed a few beers myself, nothing excessive, but enough to blur the edges of propriety. We had arrived in her car, but her uncharacteristic intoxication, even one sangria affected her significantly due to her low tolerance, meant I needed to drive us back. I had arrived on my motorcycle, a 2008 GSX-R 600, for those who care about such details, but I wasn't about to risk riding in my slightly inebriated state. As she prepared for bed, we faced a logistical dilemma. Her house was in disarray, with the living room couch buried under items destined for an upcoming yard sale. She suggested I share her bed, assuring me she would quickly fall asleep. The situation seemed innocent enough. After all, I had shared beds with people I knew far less well. Unable to sleep fully clothed, I stripped down to my boxer briefs and climbed in. What began as innocent coexistence gradually evolved into something more intimate, spooning, gentle touches. The atmosphere shifted palpably. I found myself lying on my back, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with the implications of what was happening. Then she pulled down her nightgown, exposing her enhanced breasts, and whispered her desire for pleasure. Following her lead, I began kissing and caressing her, my fingers exploring further. As the intensity built, I positioned myself to take things to their natural conclusion, and that's when clarity struck like lightning. I stopped myself, explaining that we needed to end this before it went too far. Though disappointed, she agreed. We shared a few final kisses before I extracted myself from the situation. In the bathroom, attempting to regain my composure, I was assaulted by the most revolting odor imaginable emanating from my fingers. Soap and water proved futile against the stench, nearly triggering my gag reflex. I donned my motorcycle gear and made a hasty exit, the smell persisting for another full day. Looking back, while the experience was charged with excitement, the aftermath, both physical and emotional, served as a stark reminder of why some lines should never be crossed. Story 20. My existence is the product of a teenage romance gone awry, an accidental pregnancy between a 16-year-old father and a 17-year-old mother. The weight of impending parenthood proved too heavy for my biological mother's young shoulders, and she made the decision to leave me in the care of her mother, my grandmother. Eventually, when I was 3, my grandparents formally adopted me. But beneath this seemingly straightforward narrative lies a more complex and painful truth that I've only recently uncovered. During those early years, my biological father fought desperately to gain custody of me. He recognized the toxic environment my grandparents would create and wanted to ensure I would be raised in a loving, nurturing home. My childhood under my grandparents' roof was far from the idyllic family life my father had envisioned. I wasn't so much raised as tolerated, treated as an unwelcome reminder of their daughter's mistake. I became the family's designated outcast, subjected to emotional, verbal, and physical abuse. The constant bullying from my grandfather and his daughter, my biological mother's sister, left deep psychological scars that manifested in attempted suicide, eating disorders, anxiety, and profound self-esteem issues. No one in my family knows that I'm aware of the custody battle, that brief window of time when my life could have taken a dramatically different turn. My father's attempts to secure my future were thwarted, and with them, my chance at a normal childhood vanished. Getting to know my father as an adult has been a revelation tinged with regret. The striking similarities between us in personality, interests, and temperament serve as constant reminders of what could have been. I can't help but imagine how much happier and well-adjusted I might have become under his care, surrounded by genuine love instead of conditional tolerance. Now I find myself trying to make up for lost time, building a relationship with the father I should have known all along. But the weight of those lost years hangs heavy between us. 2 decades of potential memories and bonding moments we can never recover. The knowledge that someone fought for me, truly wanted me, while I endured years of emotional neglect, is both comforting and heartbreaking. This secret understanding has reshaped my entire perspective on my childhood, leaving me to grapple with the bittersweet reality of what might have been, had the courts or fate decided differently. Story 21. For 15 years, I wore my wedding ring like a badge of honor, a symbol of commitment and shared dreams. Then the cracks began to appear. My wife developed an addiction to painkillers, and our once solid foundation began to crumble. When she finally achieved sobriety, she discovered my infidelity, a betrayal that should have been our wake-up call to rebuild. We started attending counseling sessions, making all the right noises about reconciliation and renewal. But while she believed we were working towards healing, I was already planning our divorce. Worse still, I had begun seeing someone else, carefully orchestrating my schedule to maintain both relationships. We played out an elaborate charade, each of us believing different versions of our shared reality. She thought we were mending our broken marriage. I was merely buying time until I could orchestrate a clean break. Or so I thought. During this period of deception, she told me she was visiting an old high school friend for a week. I seized the opportunity to spend time with my girlfriend, never suspecting that my wife was weaving her own web of lies. She had actually arranged to meet a man she'd connected with online, embarking on her own journey of digital infidelity turned physical reality. Their encounter took a tragic turn when they decided to experiment with drugs. The substances reacted catastrophically with her prescription medications, sending her into cardiac arrest. The ambulance was called, but she died en route to the hospital. The death certificate listed heart attack as the cause, but our family doctor later explained the likely role of drug interactions in her passing. The police questioned her companion, but filed no charges. I declined to pursue the matter further, believing he was already carrying the weight of this horror. I received the news of her death while lying in my girlfriend's bed, a moment of surreal juxtaposition that still haunts me. I had her cremated and scattered her ashes at her favorite place, surrounded by our family in a private ceremony. The next year was spent in therapy, wrestling with overwhelming guilt. For years later, I married the woman I had been seeing, my current wife. We've been married for 2 years now, and I'm genuinely happy. She's the only person who knows the full truth of what happened, besides you who are reading this now. I still carry the guilt of those final months, the lies, the deception, the missed opportunities to make things right. Sometimes I wonder if things would have ended differently had I been honest, had I given our marriage one last genuine chance. But such thoughts are futile now, mere echoes of a past that can't be changed. Story 22. This marks the first time I've ever given voice to these words, whether spoken or written. After this confession, I suspect I'll lock these memories away again, never to be revisited. But there's something compelling me to share, if only to understand myself better. I believe there's something fundamentally broken within me, some crucial emotional component that doesn't function as it should. When children experience trauma, they typically emerge scarred, their adult lives bearing the visible wounds of their past. But I don't feel scarred. I feel nothing, and that absence of damage terrifies me more than any trauma could. Sometimes I wish someone would just look me in the eye and say, "You're crazy. You need professional help." But no one ever does. From the outside, I appear perfectly normal, and that perceived normalcy makes me question my sanity even more. I'm male, though that detail feels relevant only in understanding the full scope of what happened. When I was very young, the exact age remains hazy. My older brother somehow convinced me that sleeping together naked was normal, natural. This manipulation led to molestation and eventually rape. The memories are fragmented, like shards of a broken mirror reflecting distorted pieces of the past. I was convinced it was normal, so I never questioned it or mentioned it to anyone. The only reason it finally stopped was due to a misunderstanding. He had begun finishing on me, and in my childish innocence, I thought it was urine. While I had accepted everything else as normal, being urinated on seemed obviously wrong. I confronted him, threatened to tell someone he was peeing on me, and the abuse finally ended. Years later, my mother took our family's savings, gambled it all away, and cheated on my father. One night, she came home and confessed everything. I was in the kitchen when my parents had their explosive confrontation. My mother told me to watch over my sister, then proceeded to the kitchen and began slicing her wrists. Though she survived, she's now medicated and mentally unstable. These are just the major events. There are others. Waking up naked after being drugged by someone. Friends telling me about times I got drunk and developed an entirely different personality, complete with failure to recognize familiar faces. Yet here I am, living what appears to be a normal life, married, with friends, seemingly well-adjusted. I read about people who experience one significant trauma and require years of therapy to recover. Meanwhile, I feel strangely untouched by my past, and that lack of impact disturbs me deeply. Am I suppressing everything so effectively that I've become numb? Or is there truly something broken in my emotional machinery? I feel like I should be more damaged, more affected by these experiences. The fact that I'm not makes me question everything about myself. Perhaps this emotional void is itself the damage, a fortress built so high and strong that even I can't scale its walls to reach what lies beneath. Story 23. In the early 1990s, I served as a police officer during a pivotal time in law enforcement, the transition from revolvers to semi-automatic pistols. We underwent extensive training to master these new sidearms, but no amount of practice could have prepared me for the night that would eventually drive me from law enforcement altogether. 6 months after trading in my trusted .357 Magnum for a 9mm Smith & Wesson semi-automatic, I initiated what should have been a routine traffic stop, a simple speeding violation, roughly 50 in a 35 zone. This was before the era of dashboard cameras and laptop computers. Our procedures were more primitive then. Following protocol, I called in the plate number and approached the driver's side of the vehicle. As the window began its slow descent, my radio crackled to life with an urgent message from dispatch. The vehicle matched the description of one wanted in connection with a recent drive-by shooting and homicide. In that fraction of a second, adrenaline and fear collided with devastating consequences. As I drew my weapon, my finger betrayed me, squeezing the trigger before I'd fully raised the gun. The shot rang out, the bullet punching through the dashboard and shattering the speedometer, sending plastic shrapnel raining over the startled driver. As the ringing in my ears subsided, dispatch's voice cut through the chaos with a correction that made my blood run cold. They had transposed some numbers. The car wasn't wanted after all. My heart nearly stopped as I realized what I'd done. Horror-struck, I lowered my weapon and began spewing apologies to the driver. His 2-month-old Lexus LS 400's instrument panel was now a flickering mess of damaged electronics. Acting on pure instinct and desperate to prevent this incident from becoming official, I convinced him to follow me to an ATM. I withdrew $11,000, nearly every cent I had, and handed it over in exchange for his silence. He accepted the money, and I never heard from him again. But I couldn't forget the golden rule I had violated. Keep your finger outside the trigger guard until you intend to fire. The incident haunted me so deeply that I left law enforcement for emergency medicine. I couldn't bear the thought that my next mistake might cost someone their life rather than just damage a luxury car's dashboard. Sometimes I still wake up in a cold sweat, imagining how differently that night could have ended if my aim had been just slightly lower. That single moment of panic, that tiny slip of trigger discipline, changed the entire trajectory of my career and life. While I found my calling in emergency medicine, I often wonder about the driver and whether he ever told anyone about the cop who nearly shot him over a speeding ticket. Story 24. Using a throwaway account because this story must never be traced back to me. I'm a chronic sleepwalker with a history of bizarre nocturnal adventures, but what happened on this particular night surpassed all previous episodes in terms of sheer mortification. I was on holiday with a group of friends, and we'd spent the evening doing what young people on vacation typically do, consuming an impressive quantity of alcohol before somehow managing to stumble back to our rooms relatively unscathed. So far, so normal. I drifted off to sleep, my mind wandering into what seemed like a harmless dream about playing pranks on my friends. In this dreamscape, I had decided it would be hilarious to leave a special surprise on my friend's bed. Reality came crashing back in that peculiar half-conscious state where your body responds to urgent signals while your brain remains stubbornly wrapped in sleep's embrace. The first sensation to penetrate my foggy consciousness was wetness. This was quickly followed by an overwhelming stench that can only be described as an unholy fusion of sewer waste and vodka-infused digestive rebellion. As awareness slowly returned, I made several horrifying discoveries in rapid succession. First, I was sitting in a kitchen cupboard, specifically on the middle shelf, which had partially collapsed under my weight. Second, I was surrounded by the evidence of my body's betrayal, both liquid and solid varieties. Third, I was creating what could only be described as a biohazard zone in someone else's property. Panic-stricken, I checked on my roommate, who was by some miracle still sound asleep despite the noxious fumes permeating our shared space. I knew I was on a timer. No one could sleep through that smell for long. What followed was perhaps the most frantic cleaning operation ever conducted at 3 a.m. Armed with toilet paper and desperate determination, I worked like a man possessed, trying to eliminate all evidence of my unconscious crime. The real challenge came when I discovered that some of the mess had seeped under the cupboard. I had to lift the entire unit to access the horror beneath, all while trying to maintain complete silence. Through some combination of luck and adrenaline-fueled ingenuity, I managed to restore the broken shelf to a precariously balanced state, secure the cupboard doors, and dispose of the evidence. The entire time, I was acutely aware that discovery would mean becoming a legendary figure in our friend group for all the wrong reasons. To this day, no one knows about my midnight renovation of their kitchen cupboard, and I plan to take this secret to my grave. However, I did notice that particular cupboard was replaced a few months later, and I can't help but wonder if someone eventually discovered some lingering evidence of my nocturnal misadventure. Story 25. The moment I saw this post, I knew exactly which secret I needed to share. Two people from my college friend group began a casual relationship, the kind euphemistically referred to as friends with benefits, though alcohol played a more significant role than friendship. She was a close friend of my then-girlfriend, and he was my rugby teammate and good friend. After a few months, he moved on, as people often do in these situations, finding new partners and leaving the past behind. One evening, I noticed her unusual demeanor, a profound sadness that seemed to emanate from her very being. Initially, I assumed it was jealousy, a natural response to seeing him with other women. Later that night, after several drinks had lowered her carefully constructed walls, she confided in me. Through tears, she revealed that she had been pregnant with his child and had undergone an abortion, telling no one except her mother. The revelation had earned her mother's immediate disownment, leaving her to face the procedure and its aftermath entirely alone. She was devastated, not just by the physical and emotional trauma of the abortion, but by the crushing weight of rejection from the one person she had trusted with her secret. I watched as she struggled with feelings of isolation and abandonment, caught in a spiral of depression that seemed to have no bottom. I encouraged her to seek professional help and counseling, knowing she needed more support than I could provide. But she made me swear never to tell anyone, not my girlfriend, not the father, not a single soul. The burden of her secret became mine to carry as well. 5 years have passed since then. She moved to another state, starting fresh where no one knew her story. I still see my rugby buddy regularly, sharing beers and laughs, all while carrying the knowledge of what he never knew he lost. The secret has grown heavier with time, like a stone in my pocket that I can never remove. Sometimes when we're all together at rugby reunions, I catch myself watching their interactions, her careful distance, his casual friendliness, neither showing any sign of their shared history. I wonder if he ever suspected, if she ever considered telling him, if things might have been different had they both known how to communicate their fears and hopes. The weight of this unspoken truth has taught me something about the complexity of human relationships, how we can be simultaneously so intimately connected and so profoundly distant from each other. It's shown me how a single decision can create ripples that continue long after the initial splash has faded, touching lives in ways we never anticipated. Story 26. The delicate balance of deception in my life revolves around my girlfriend's father, a Baptist minister of the most stereotypical variety, the kind who preaches fire and brimstone, condemning those he deems sinful to eternal damnation. Despite having lived with his daughter for several years, we've been friends even longer. He remains blissfully unaware of two crucial facts. I'm gay, and she's bisexual. We rarely cross paths with him, and we've decided it's simpler to maintain this facade than to weather the inevitable storm of religious outrage. He already criticizes her for her irregular church attendance. We can only imagine his reaction to the full truth of our lives. Occasionally, he requests her assistance with church functions, and I accompany her to make these obligations more bearable. During last year's Easter celebration, a nearby group began discussing marriage equality. Her father eagerly joined in, spouting the usual vitriolic rhetoric about homosexuality being unnatural and sinful. The familiar hatred wrapped in religious justification made my blood boil, but for her sake, I maintained my composure, gritting my teeth to prevent an outburst. Later, while helping return items to his office, I noticed a large cross prominently displayed on his desk. In a moment of pure impulse, I grabbed it. My girlfriend caught me holding it, and before she could protest, I excused myself to use the restroom. In that private stall, I committed what I considered a perfect act of rebellion. I masturbated with the cross, channeling years of suppressed anger into one deliberate act of defiance. Afterward, I returned it to its place on his desk, knowing he handles it daily. The thought of him reverently touching this object, unaware of its desecration, brings me a perverse satisfaction. If he knew, he'd likely suffer a coronary, which only adds to my secret pleasure. Since then, whenever my girlfriend is guilted into helping with church events, I've accompanied her and chosen a new personal item of his to defile. It's become our private joke, a small act of resistance against his bigotry. We share knowing glances and stifled laughter, finding solidarity in our subtle rebellion against his unwitting hypocrisy. This secret acts as a pressure valve, releasing the tension that builds up from maintaining our elaborate charade. It's our way of reclaiming power in a situation where we often feel powerless, finding humor in what could otherwise be a source of deep pain. / Existing code. Story 1. My father had a harrowing experience during his service in the Navy. The official story he always recounted was that he had been working several floors up on a ship, traversing a ladder system that connected multiple levels, when he plummeted straight down onto the unforgiving metal deck below. According to his account, safety nets that were supposed to prevent such catastrophic falls had been mysteriously removed. The accident shattered most of the bones in his feet and legs, resulting in an emergency airlift to the nearest hospital. He spent months encased in thigh-high casts before receiving an honorable discharge from the Navy. This happened before I was born, and everyone accepted this version of events without question. However, a few months ago, he finally revealed the truth to me. I had always sensed there was something more lurking beneath the surface, especially given the haunted way he spoke about that period and the unsettling manner in which he referenced his fellow servicemen. The Purple Heart he'd been awarded had always raised questions in my mind, but whenever I inquired about it, he would become eerily silent. My father, as it turned out, was a UDT, underwater demolition technician, during what was ostensibly peacetime. He and his elite team of divers had been dispatched on a classified mission off the coast of an unnamed foreign nation. To this day, he refuses to specify which waters. Their objective: to neutralize certain vessels under the cover of absolute darkness. As they silently planted their explosive charges, enemy fire pierced the black waters around them. At one point, my father felt something massive brush against him in the darkness, a moment that still haunts his nightmares. Tragedy struck when one of the charges detonated prematurely, decimating nearly his entire tethered team. My father's legs were catastrophically injured, and only one other team member survived long enough to heroically drag him back to their ship. Together, they managed to retrieve 6 bodies, or what remained of them, from the silent, pitch-black ocean. Those fallen comrades were immediately cut loose and deliberately sunk to maintain the mission's secrecy. The brave soul who saved my father succumbed to his injuries shortly after reaching the ship, leaving my father, lucky number 8, as the sole survivor. What followed was a nightmarish ordeal. He was shuttled between 2 hospitals, with one brand-new facility callously turning him away because their chief surgeon, convinced my father wouldn't survive, didn't want to tarnish their pristine operating room's record. When he finally received treatment, his superiors deliberately withheld his location from both his parents and my mother, whom he had married just 7 days prior. He later learned that there had been discussions about pulling his plug prematurely, a fate he only avoided thanks to a vigilant commanding officer who maintained a constant watch over him and later confirmed these sinister conversations had indeed taken place. My father survived, but his story remains shrouded in classified darkness. The ocean now terrifies him, and he cannot bear to swim in even partial darkness. The officer who protected him passed away several years ago, taking many secrets to his grave. We'll never see my father's Purple Heart, and I can't share this truth with anyone because they either wouldn't believe it or might condemn him for simply following orders. He acted under command, yet due to the covert nature of the mission, he'll never be officially recognized as the hero he is. There exists no memorial for those 7 other brave divers who lost their lives that night. Someday, I hope to write a book about this and fight to have his Purple Heart officially acknowledged, so he can finally find the closure he deserves before he passes away. Story 2. It was a crisp autumn evening when my life took an unexpected turn. At 20 years old, I was cycling along a designated mixed-use path, the kind meant for both cyclists and pedestrians. The setting sun cast long shadows across the trail as I noticed an older couple up ahead, probably in their 50s, taking a leisurely stroll. As I approached them, maintaining a respectful distance, something utterly bizarre occurred. The man, without warning or provocation, suddenly lunged toward my bike, his face contorted with inexplicable rage as he attempted to forcibly dismount me, bellowing something about cyclists not belonging on the path. Through pure instinct and luck, I managed to swerve at the last second, narrowly avoiding what could have been a devastating collision. What happened next was, in retrospect, my gravest error in judgment. Instead of continuing on my way, I screeched to a halt, dismounted my bike, and confronted my would-be assailant. The peaceful evening air was shattered by my voice as I unleashed a torrent of expletives, my hands gesturing wildly in disbelief at his reckless behavior. The man, a towering figure compared to my modest 5 feet 8 inches frame, began advancing toward me with menacing determination. Despite my slim build, I had a secret advantage. I was a boxer in training at the time, though this should have made me more, not less, restrained. As he closed the distance between us, his face flushed with anger, he launched a clumsy but powerful punch aimed at my head. Years of training kicked in automatically. I sidestepped his attack with fluid precision and countered with a devastating blow. He crumpled to the ground like a marionette with cut strings. Without pausing to witness the aftermath, I leaped back onto my bike and pedaled away into the gathering dusk, my heart pounding in my ears. The next day, I was shocked to discover a dramatically different version of events splashed across the local newspaper. The headline painted a picture of a peaceful elderly couple viciously attacked by a masked assailant during their evening constitutional. According to the article, the husband had heroically defended his wife before being brutally struck down. The story claimed he required extensive reconstructive surgery, effectively ruining their long-anticipated vacation. A part of me felt he had received his just desserts for his unprovoked aggression, but the incident served as a profound wake-up call. It was a stark illustration of how easily truth can be distorted, and it forever changed my relationship with media reporting. Sometimes, I still wonder about the real consequences of my actions that fateful evening, and whether I could have handled things differently. Story 3. The weight of guilt has been my constant companion for years now, stemming from an indiscretion that occurred when I was 23. A transgression I've never dared share with another soul. It involves my aunt, who was 46 at the time, and 2 days that forever altered the dynamics of our family, though no one else knows it. Fate had conspired to leave us stranded together, and what began as innocent, playful banter evolved into something far more dangerous. Looking back now, with the clarity of hindsight, I realized she had always been aware of my youthful infatuation. She would often tease me with carefully crafted compliments that walked the line between familial affection and something more provocative. During those 48 hours of isolation, our relationship transformed in ways that still make me flush with shame when I recall them. The details of what transpired remain too uncomfortable to fully articulate, but they've left an indelible mark on my conscience. Even now, after more than a decade, these memories continue to haunt my quieter moments. I haven't seen her in over 10 years, though not due to any deliberate avoidance. Our lives simply took different geographical paths, and family gatherings rarely aligned to bring us together. What makes this burden particularly heavy is that her husband, my uncle, is one of the most genuinely kind-hearted individuals I've ever known. His unwavering goodness only serves to deepen the well of my remorse. While I'm certain nothing of that nature will ever occur again, this secret feels like a time bomb buried in the foundation of our family's trust. It's a confession I'll carry to my grave, knowing that its revelation would shatter more lives than just my own. Story 4. The events I'm about to recount occurred when I was 17, during what began as an ordinary night at a college fraternity party a few towns away. The evening took a sinister turn when my friends, who had brought me there, became embroiled in an altercation and abandoned me without transportation home. A fraternity member offered to drive me back, and in my naive trust, I accepted. He insisted I wait until the party concluded, so at 2 a.m., I found myself in the basement as he cleared out the last remaining revelers. The atmosphere shifted palpably when he returned. His previously friendly demeanor transformed into something predatory, his eyes glinting with malicious intent. When I rejected his advances, his face contorted with rage. In a horrifying instant, he seized my hair, forced me over a pool table, and began tearing at my clothes. Brandishing a pool cue, he threatened violence, his voice dripping with cruel anticipation as he promised I would enjoy it. In that moment of terror, survival instinct took over. I began speaking rapidly, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I recited everything I knew about him, his name, his scholarship status, his family background. I warned him that if he proceeded, I would ensure everyone knew. His family, the press, his university. I told him he might as well kill me because I would never stop exposing him. His response was a vicious punch to my face before ordering me to leave. I walked 22 miles through dangerous urban streets in the dead of night, my mind oscillating between paralyzing fear and burning rage. 2 weeks later, I returned to that fraternity house. I had transformed myself into exactly what he thought I was, appearing vulnerable, intoxicated, an easy target. When his fraternity brothers left us alone, I played my role perfectly. I flirted, kissed him, let him believe he had won. Just as I was about to straddle him, I leaned close to his ear and whispered with ice in my voice. No one touches me without my permission. The pocket knife from my discarded jeans found its mark in his throat. I gathered my belongings, fled into the night, and never looked back. Later, I learned he now speaks through a trachea tube, a permanent reminder that actions have consequences. Story 5. During my college years, I stumbled upon what could be a crucial piece of one of America's most infamous criminal cases. It was 1994, and I was working for a company that hosted an annual summer gathering for employees from across Southern California. At that year's June celebration, I found myself in conversation with a man whose girlfriend worked as a paralegal for Howard Weitzman, O.J. Simpson's attorney at the time. The timing of this encounter was chilling. Nicole Brown Simpson had been murdered just days before this party. What the man revealed to me that evening would haunt my thoughts for years to come. According to him, his girlfriend had been present in Weitzman's office during a pivotal moment. when O.J. Simpson made a phone call the day after the murder. It wasn't unusual for Simpson to contact his attorney, so Weitzman had casually put the call on speakerphone. What happened next sent shivers through everyone in the room. According to my drinking companion, O.J.'s voice crackled through the speaker with a shocking admission. "I just killed my wife, and the police are asking questions." The atmosphere in the room reportedly froze. Weitzman immediately snatched up the receiver, cutting off the speakerphone. In the aftermath of this stunning moment, the attorney allegedly required the girlfriend to sign a confidentiality agreement, declaring everything she had heard was protected under attorney-client privilege. The man relating this story seemed deeply troubled by the weight of this knowledge, though his intoxicated state made me initially skeptical. I dismissed it as too fantastical to be true. This was before the infamous white Bronco chase, before the trial that would captivate the nation, before all the details that would later come to light. Looking back now, with everything we know about the case, I often wonder about that chance encounter and the credibility of what I heard. Was I privy to one of the most significant confessions in criminal history, or simply caught up in someone's drunken fabrication? The timing, the specific details, and the way everything later unfolded sometimes make me question my initial skepticism. Story 6. The morning that shattered my perception of reality began innocuously enough. In my late teens, my father announced he wanted to take me to a museum at his workplace. As we drove through the morning mist, I casually inquired why an electrical engineering firm would maintain a museum. His response changed everything I thought I knew about my life. With a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth, he revealed that he had never actually worked for Company X, the employer I'd grown up believing was his workplace. The revelation hung in the air between us as I sat in stunned silence, my mind racing to process this new reality. I began paying closer attention to our surroundings, noting every detail of our journey with newfound awareness. Upon arrival, my father produced an enigmatic blue identification card bearing only his photograph and an official seal. After the guard's careful inspection and return of the card, my father handed it to me with a knowing smirk. In that moment, the truth crystallized. My father was a CIA operative. What followed was a surreal morning exploring what he playfully called the coolest spy museum you'll never see. We wandered through the campus, including the mysterious Cryptos installation. Given my proficiency in several foreign languages, he took particular pleasure in showing me the old FBIS area, where I sifted through fascinating open-source materials. Later, pieces of my childhood began falling into place like a complex puzzle. I realized we had once lived illegally in a Western European country, where discovery of my father's true identity would have resulted in his arrest and likely diplomatic trading. He shared fragments of his career, stories of tracing money trails and tracking terrorist group financing, encounters with dangerous operatives that made my blood run cold. The most chilling revelation was his description of waking to 3 a.m. phone calls, those heart-stopping moments when he had to remember which name he was using and what cover job he was supposed to have before answering. The constant maintenance of multiple identities had become second nature to him. Though he's retired now, we still maintain careful silence about his career. Too many details could potentially expose operations or identities if names or locations were ever deduced. Sometimes I catch myself watching him, this man I thought I knew so well, and wondering about all the secrets he still carries, all the stories that will remain forever untold. Story 7. I'm watching my parents' once solid marriage crumble before my eyes, a victim of circumstances beyond anyone's control. The catalyst was my father's sudden job loss, leaving him unable to return to the UAE. His former employer, in a cruel twist of fate, is holding him responsible for decisions the boss himself made, decisions my father had explicitly warned against. Now, my father faces the threat of imprisonment if he attempts to return. Meanwhile, my mother remains trapped in the country, tethered by the weight of a failing business venture that consumed half their life savings. The timing couldn't have been worse. Just 8 months after she launched the enterprise, an unprecedented financial crash sent everything spiraling downward. My father, stripped of his prestigious position and the ability to support us, harbors a growing resentment he tries to hide. His dream of a peaceful retirement with my mother seems to be slipping away like sand through his fingers. My mother, consumed by guilt over the business's timing, works herself to exhaustion trying to salvage what remains. She's desperately attempting to redeem herself, though no one could have foreseen the economic catastrophe that would unfold. The burden of her emotional turmoil falls largely on me, the eldest son, once viewed as the family's golden child, but now just another soul struggling to stay afloat in these turbulent waters. I'm writing this during my 4th consecutive 16-hour workday, my eyes burning from staring at screens and my mind dulled by exhaustion. There will be no weekend respite. My demanding boss has made sure of that, and I desperately need this job experience. On top of my professional obligations, my mother needs my help preparing for a 1-hour speech she's giving on Saturday, despite her crippling fear of public speaking. I'm also juggling endless calls to potential clients for her business, trying to keep hope alive. Some days, the weight of it all becomes so overwhelming that I fantasize about disappearing into a monastery, leaving behind this world of constant pressure and expectations. But I know my father would never forgive me for abandoning my mother in her hour of need. The most challenging part is maintaining a facade of normalcy. No one outside our immediate family knows the extent of our struggles or how close we are to complete collapse. This is our private battle, fought behind closed doors and brave faces, while the world continues to turn, oblivious to our silent suffering. Story 8. Back in 2004, while stationed with the Air Force in Okinawa, Japan, I experienced what remains the most surreal moment of my military career. Fresh from boot camp and technical training, I had just touched down in Naha, the bustling capital city. My welcoming committee consisted of a staff sergeant and a tech sergeant, who greeted me with surprising warmth at the airport and efficiently loaded my belongings into their waiting vehicle. What should have been a straightforward drive to the base took an unexpected turn when they suddenly veered off the main thoroughfare onto a dubious side street. Confused, I ventured to ask our destination. Their response, delivered with barely contained amusement, was cryptic. "Oh, we have to take you to this club first. Real high-class place. You'll love it. Once we're done, we'll drop you at the barracks." We pulled into a narrow alley that seemed to be a collection point for the city's refuse and displaced citizens. The establishment itself appeared decrepit, but following protocol, I dutifully trailed my superior officers inside. The interior was dimly lit, with individual round tables draped in red cloths, each illuminated by a single lamp creating islands of light in the darkness. The moment we entered, a stern-faced doorman confronted us with an ultimatum. "You buy drink or leave. You buy drink and sit." My supervisors, struggling to suppress their mirth, paid the cover charge, and we were seated at one of the mysterious tables. Their barely contained laughter should have been my first warning of what was to come. Then the spotlight hit the stage, and the curtains parted. Standing there, in all her glory, was an elderly Asian woman who must have been in her late 80s. Picture Yoda with sagging anatomy and liver spots, and you're getting close to the reality of what I witnessed. The music began, and she strutted across the stage with surprising confidence, producing a banana from behind the curtain with theatrical flourish. What followed defied all logic and decency. After peeling the banana with deliberate slowness, she proceeded to demonstrate a talent that I'm still trying to forget. She would lift her leg like a dog marking its territory, release a martial art-style battle cry, HIYH, and through some unholy combination of muscle control and physics, project segments of banana across the room with remarkable accuracy. The horror reached its peak when one of the intoxicated Marines seated in front of us, encouraged by his companions chanting of, "Eat it, eat it, eat it," actually caught and consumed one of the airborne banana pieces. I sat there in stunned silence while my supervisors literally rolled on the floor, overcome with laughter at my obvious distress. To this day, it remains the most profound WTF moment of my existence. Sometimes late at night, I still question whether it actually happened or if it was some sort of jet lag-induced hallucination. But the knowing grins I still receive from those sergeants at unit reunions confirm that yes, it was all terrifyingly real. Story 9. This confession has remained locked away in my heart until now, a memory from July 25, 2000, a date that would make national headlines. The evening air was thick with summer heat as I strolled down the street with a group of friends. Our attention was drawn to a massive gate, its imposing presence made more mysterious by the influence of alcohol in our systems. As we approached, curiosity began to gnaw at our minds. What secrets lay beyond those forbidding bars? One of my friends, let's call him John, became absolutely fixated on the gate. While the rest of us continued walking, he remained behind, attempting to scale the 10-foot barrier. I watched with growing concern as he repeatedly slipped and fell, his determination outweighing his coordination. Being the most clear-headed of the group, I tried to drag him away, but his obsession with what lay beyond had taken hold. Finally, hoping to end his dangerous attempts, I offered to climb over myself and investigate. Reaching the top, I perched there momentarily, looking back at John's enthusiastic thumbs up. What I saw on the other side stopped my heart. They were everywhere. The sight left me speechless, unable to articulate the horror before me. Something compelled me to drop down onto the other side. As I landed, they all turned to face me, their eyes meeting mine in silent desperation. Without hesitation, I began frantically untying them. Once freed, we made our way back to the gate together, moving as quietly as possible through the darkness. Just as freedom seemed within reach, I stumbled over some scattered metal debris. A porch light suddenly blazed to light, shattering our cover of darkness. Panic surged through me as I sprinted to catch up with the others, my trembling hands fumbling with the gate's lock. Finally wrenching it open, we scattered in different directions, never to cross paths again. I knew in my heart that I had done something right that night. Yes, it was me. I was the one who let the dogs out. Story 10. When I was 19, fate introduced me to a captivating Asian woman at my local gym. Our initial conversation flowed naturally, and after mustering my courage, I asked for her phone number. That's when I discovered she was 24, a 5-year age gap that seemed like a chasm at the time. Despite my youth's inherent insecurities, I decided to pursue her with the determination of someone twice my age. What followed was a relationship built on conditions and compromises. I became her secret, carefully hidden from family and friends because I was both younger and African American. Our love existed in the shadows, no public displays of affection, no honest introductions. When we ventured out together, I played the role of a co-worker, maintaining a careful distance. Our only sanctuary was my home, and even then, only when my mother was absent. She shouldered all our expenses, dinners, movies, vacations, because I was a broke college student. Despite the uneven financial dynamic and the constant need for discretion, our feelings grew deeper. We exchanged declarations of love, and I believed we could overcome any obstacle. Then came the deadline. One day, she calmly informed me that our relationship had to end by June. Her explanation was devastating in its simplicity. She couldn't envision a future with me because her family would never accept an African-American man. I refused to believe that love couldn't conquer such prejudice, convincing myself that her feelings would ultimately overpower family expectations. But when June arrived, she disappeared from my life with surgical precision. No more text responses, blocked on AGM and Facebook, even changing her workout schedule at our shared gym to avoid any chance encounters. Our year-long relationship vanished, as if it had never existed. Last week, I spotted her at the gym with her new boyfriend, an Asian man who perfectly fit her family's expectations. The sight confirmed what I had refused to accept. Sometimes love isn't enough to bridge the gap society creates. She had found someone her family could embrace without reservation. The experience left me with a bittersweet understanding of how deeply cultural expectations can shape our most intimate choices, and how the heart's desires often bow to family traditions, even in our modern world. Story 11. The resemblance between my boss and me is uncanny. We could easily pass for brothers or even father and son. However, the similarities are purely superficial. I stand 3 inches taller, maintain a considerably leaner frame, and while he embodies the stereotypical sports enthusiast, I lean more toward the intellectual side of life. Our paths cross occasionally at company barbecues, where I've gradually gotten to know his wife. She's in her early 30s, while I'm in my late 20s, and he's well into his 40s. During one such gathering, she approached me privately with an unexpected proposition. My boss, she revealed, wanted to start a family. What followed was a request that would forever alter the dynamics of our relationships. Initially, I refused her suggestion, fearing the inevitable consequences of discovery. The thought of losing my well-paying position kept me awake at night. But her persistence, coupled with her reasoning, eventually wore down my resistance. She argued that our physical similarities would make it the perfect solution. Since I was taller, more attractive, and demonstrably more intelligent, she wanted me to father her child instead of my boss. Over 2 weeks, we met secretly 4 times, and I fulfilled my role in this clandestine arrangement. Soon after, she announced to my boss that she was ready to start trying for a baby. 9 months later, my firstborn son entered the world. My boss was overjoyed, completely unaware of the truth, while I grappled with the bizarre reality of watching my child from afar. 2 years passed, and they decided to try for another child. By then, I had somewhat reconciled myself to the situation, viewing my role as more of an anonymous donor than a father. When the time came again, I played my part. Their daughter, my daughter, was born 6 months ago, and their son, my son, is now 3 years old. The boy bears an unmistakable resemblance to me. I see it in his eyes. But those same eyes light up with pure love when he looks at the man he calls dad, and I witness daily how deeply my boss loves and nurtures both children. I found myself in the strange position of watching another man raise my biological children, all while maintaining the facade of a loyal employee. I've recently met someone special, a woman I'm considering proposing to, dreaming of starting my own family. A real family this time. But I'm haunted by the question of whether I should tell her about the children who share my DNA but will never know me as their father. This secret weighs heavily on my conscience, a burden I never anticipated bearing when I first agreed to this unconventional arrangement. Story 12. 7 years as a pawnbroker had exposed me to every conceivable hard luck story and desperate situation imaginable. But one particular customer's tale would forever change my perspective on the value of human compassion. She first appeared on a gray Tuesday morning, clutching her late husband's wedding ring like a lifeline. Her voice trembled as she explained that he had recently passed away, leaving her with nothing of value except this precious symbol of their shared life. The meager $30 I could offer seemed almost insulting, but she accepted it with quiet dignity, promising to return within weeks to reclaim her treasure. Thus began a heart-wrenching cycle that would span 3 years. Every few weeks, she would return to pawn the ring, borrow those same $30, and faithfully return within a few weeks to reclaim it. Towards the end, the ring began staying longer. The standard 90-day loan period sometimes requiring extensions through finance charge payments when she couldn't manage the full redemption amount. One day, while sorting through expired loans, I discovered her ring had exceeded its term by several days. Without hesitation, I secretly tucked it away in the safe and modified the expiration date in our computer system. I knew I was risking my job, but the thought of this woman losing her last connection to her husband was unbearable. She reminded me so much of my own deceased mother. Every time I looked at her, I saw the same quiet strength in her eyes. When she finally returned, I discreetly explained how I'd preserved her chance to reclaim the ring. Her gratitude was palpable, but she confessed she was still struggling to gather the money. Assuring her I would continue holding the ring, I warned her about the risk to my employment if discovered. She promised to return the very next day with the funds, her eyes bright with determination. For days passed without word from her. I wrestled with mounting anxiety about the situation until she appeared again, but what she revealed shattered my heart. She had been arrested in Portland while attempting prostitution, a desperate bid to raise the mere $18 in interest charges. The thought of this dignified woman driven to such extremes for such a small sum was devastating. I promised to hold on to the ring indefinitely, planning to pay the charges myself on my next payday. If only I hadn't been so financially strained myself. Thanks largely to an expensive girlfriend at the time, I would have covered it immediately. That was the last time I saw her alive. The next day's online news delivered the crushing revelation. She had driven to the Oregon coast and walked into the ocean, choosing to join her husband rather than continue her struggle alone. The realization that a human life had been lost over $18 and change haunts me to this day. Now I carry a $20 bill in my wallet with her name written on it, a reminder and a promise that if I ever again have the chance to save a life for such a small sum, I'll be ready. I eventually purchased her ring myself, and it remains one of my most treasured possessions. Sometimes I hold it and wonder if I could have done more, if one small act of additional kindness might have changed her fate. Story 13. In the hospital where I volunteered, there was a surgeon whose brilliance bordered on the miraculous. His hands moved with an almost divine precision, every incision, every suture executed with perfect grace. His technical prowess was matched only by his bedside manner. He possessed that rare ability to put patients at ease with just a few well-chosen words and a reassuring smile. His fellow doctors spoke of him with reverence. Nurses practically worshipped the ground he walked on, and patients regarded him as their guardian angel. Even we volunteers would have gladly donated a kidney just for the chance to observe him at work. His presence in the operating room was electric, his confidence infectious, his results consistently extraordinary. But beneath this gleaming facade lurked a darker reality. This gifted healer harbored a devastating secret. He was an alcoholic of the most severe variety. When I say alcoholic, I'm not referring to the occasional overindulgence. This man would leave the hospital after his shifts and proceed to drink himself into oblivion 5 nights a week, his schedule dictated only by his call rotation. When he wasn't saving lives in the hospital, he was slowly destroying his own in various bars across the city. One night around 2 a.m., while walking home from my girlfriend's place, I stumbled upon a figure sprawled face up beside a trash can. The stench of hard liquor and vomit created a noxious cloud that extended 10 feet in every direction. Concerned about the risk of aspiration, I rushed to roll the man onto his side. The shock of recognition nearly stopped my heart when I saw his face illuminated by the flickering streetlight. He wasn't completely unconscious, as I'd initially thought. His lips were moving, barely audibly, repeating a single name over and over. Fiona. I stood there frozen, unsure how to proceed. Calling the police or hospital would only damage his reputation, potentially ending his career and depriving countless future patients of his life-saving skills. Instead, I carefully dragged his body to a nearby park bench, positioning him safely on his side before reluctantly leaving him there. Later, I discovered the heartbreaking truth behind that whispered name. Fiona had been his first patient death, lost due to a split-second judgment call in the operating room. That single moment of uncertainty, that one irreversible decision, had haunted him ever since. Each drink was an attempt to drown out the memory of her face, each binge a futile effort to numb the pain of that first failure. The irony was brutal. Here was a man who had saved countless lives with his extraordinary skills, yet was slowly killing himself because of the one life he couldn't save. His brilliant mind and gifted hands continued to perform miracles by day, while his tortured soul sought oblivion by night. Story 14. As a security doorman at a local bar, I've witnessed countless nights of revelry and regret. But one particular evening stands out in my memory, not for what happened during my shift, but for what transpired after. It was the night of a server's birthday celebration at the neighboring establishment. While I maintained my professional composure working the door, the party next door was in full swing. At 2 a.m., after shooing the last stragglers from my bar, I began my walk through the dimly lit parking lot toward home. That's when I noticed a hunched figure in the darkness, leaning precariously against a car. Upon closer inspection, I recognized one of the servers from next door, a somewhat solitary character who often faced subtle ridicule for his eccentric nature. The scene before me was apocalyptic. Both he and the interior of his car were thoroughly coated in the evening's poor decisions, and he was making a valiant but misguided attempt to climb into the vehicle. A wave of empathy washed over me. Despite his reputation as the office oddball, no one deserved to face this kind of humiliation. Making a quick decision, I directed him to sneak around to the back of the restaurant near the dumpsters, promising to meet him there. I fabricated a plausible excuse to re-enter the still-cleaning establishment, then slipped out the back door. With the precision of a covert operative, I located the water hose, cranked it to full pressure, and snaked it under the gate. What followed was perhaps the most surreal impromptu cleaning service I've ever provided, hosing down a grown man behind a dumpster at 2 a.m. while trying to maintain absolute silence. After commandeering some server towels to address the automotive disaster, I ensured he was safely positioned to sleep off his overindulgence in his now somewhat less disgusting car. We never spoke of that night again, but we both knew that if word had gotten out, he would have never lived it down. Sometimes the kindest acts are the ones that remain forever unacknowledged. Their only reward the knowledge that you spared someone from becoming the punchline of an office legend. Story 15. During my freshman year of college, I unwittingly became the beneficiary of an interesting case of mistaken identity. As a quiet, articulate young man who preferred intellectual pursuits over sports and found more comfort in female company than male bonding, I became the subject of widespread speculation about my sexual orientation. I wasn't particularly flamboyant, but there was something about my demeanor that led people to make assumptions. When directly questioned, I would simply state that I was straight, but the presumption persisted. What amused me most was that even the openly gay students on campus found the situation hilarious, knowing full well that the campus rumor mill had gotten it completely wrong. This misunderstanding led to an unexpected advantage. Many of my male classmates, secure in their assumption about my orientation, had no qualms about their girlfriends spending time in my dorm room while they attended football or hockey games. My room became something of a sanctuary, a comfortable gathering place for young women seeking refuge from the testosterone-fueled atmosphere that dominated much of campus life. What followed was perhaps the most morally questionable period of my life. Over the course of 9 months, I ended up having intimate encounters with 7 different women, all of them girlfriends of trusting, albeit naive, young men. This included the girlfriends of my RA, my roommate, and even the guy next door. I had essentially become a stealth Casanova, exploiting the protection offered by their false assumptions to engage in these clandestine liaisons. In essence, I was a wolf in sheep's clothing, using the very stereotype that might have made others uncomfortable to slip beneath the radar of suspicious boyfriends. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. I had become exactly the type of predatory figure that these men thought they were protecting their girlfriends from, just not in the way they imagined. Looking back now, I recognize the betrayal inherent in my actions. While the deception provided an odd sort of thrill at the time, it came at the cost of multiple relationships and trust bonds. Sometimes I wonder if karma will eventually catch up with me for that period of calculated duplicity. Story 16. I'm planning my disappearance with the methodical precision of someone mapping an escape route from prison. The catalyst for this impending vanishing act is the knowledge that my girlfriend is preparing to leave me. Not due to any dramatic falling out or betrayal, but because of circumstances beyond our control, technical complications that neither of us can overcome. The alternatives we've discussed seem too daunting for a relationship as young as ours to weather.